It's nobody else's business. If you're fascinated with changing the look and shape of your body, go for it. Changing the look and shape of your body towards maybe some sort of aesthetic that you like better, and viewing it as you are your own work of art. Rest assured that as you move towards that, it's highly likely it's leading you to better long-term outcomes as far as health goes as well. So they're not mutually exclusive.
Bringing you a reasoned approach to health and fitness. This is the Phi Life Podcast.
Welcome to the Phi Life Podcast. I'm John Barber, and with me is Brad Pilon. And today we're going to talk about how basically the basic rules or practices of diet and fitness that are now being researched to the tune of millions of dollars, both in exercise and diet and every which way you can slice them up, has more or less been solved 70, 80 years ago, maybe, without any research to prove any of it, but just put into practice, and just the results on the people doing it sort of figured it all out. And somehow we've gotten to this point where just tons of money is being spent to try to prove things that I think we already had figured out like ages ago.
Trial and error, right?
Yeah, trial and error. Yeah. So we're going to walk through the history of basically diet and fitness, and how you'll realize, hopefully by the end of this, you'll realize, oh, right. So just right back to the beginning, it's always worked. And, there's nothing new is under the sun. And if anything, we're just way, way overcomplicating it nowadays.
I'm going to actually posit by the end of it, there's thievery going on, and that it's science stealing from art. And we'll get into that later on. But I want to start off with what I think is a really important quote. And it goes like this: "The athletes of today are inferior to those of former times. It's not the athletes who have changed per se, but the athletic training. It is lack of healthy training and vigorous exercise." Which is something we say now, right? We're like, man, like it's kids these days or athletes today, they're nothing what they were, 100 years ago or whatever. But what makes that quote so important to me is it was from Flavius Philostratus, somewhere around 200 AD. So we constantly romanticize the idea that, kind of what we're doing is wrong and there's a better way, or we used to be, these more rugged versions, better, just stronger people in general. And it's sort of always been the thought process, right? So we're always trying to science our way back to the way we were without doing the things we used to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's basically exactly kind of what the sentiment I was trying to get across. But yeah, so I started my little, I guess, research, or reminding me. I mean, this is all stuff we've covered before in the roughly the 70's era. Of exercise and diet, bodybuilding rooted culture. Now, it doesn't matter if this was rooted in the Schwarzenegger men, both men and women alike. This is all of the things we've ever done since then to try to get in shape. Is really, they kind of, I guess, popularized it.
So this is the pumping iron era, right?
Yeah,
1970s. Yeah, okay.
Right. But Brad, I think you went a little further back to start this research. So I'm going to throw it to you to take us back and walk us through how we arrive at how we've way overcomplicated it today.
Way overcomplicated.
This is very simple.
So what we're going to do is we're going to borrow heavily from a book called Sweat, written by Bill Hayes. And it's Sweat, A History of Exercise. Great book. I recommend you guys all pick it up and read it if you're into the sort of history of all this. But in this, Bill goes back to the 1570s. One of my favorite times, because it was the time that my favorite author, Michael de Montaigne, was alive. At the same time, Girolamo Mercurial, I think, a 1573 Italian physician, was interested in exercise because the idea of physical culture had sort of died out in the 1200s, that sort of area where working on your body was a sign of vanity and you should be purely working on your soul. This was kind of a religious movement that you should just be working on the inner you, and working on the outer you is just a vanity thing. But he wanted to bring back physical culture, and he had taken it, has he worded it? As my province, to restore to the light the art of exercise, once so highly esteemed, but now dead and forgotten. So this 1570s, he's trying to bring it back, right? But what I thought was super interesting about this was that the stigma around bodybuilding existed even in the 1570s. By this quote, those who were overconcerned with beefing up their bodies, so same terms, and gaining strength, produced minds and senses that were dull, torrid, and slow. So that same kind of, do it in a way that's healthy. But if you try to be a bodybuilder per se, you're just going to somehow become dumber and slower. And I thought that was really interesting because it goes along with the stigma of why we always, even though John and I are positing to you that the 1970s bodybuilders kind of had it all figured out, for some reason throughout history we've hated the fact that they've had it figured out, right? There's something about an enlarged body, especially on men and very especially on women, that makes us be like, but something. So it's always sort of been this way. It's kind of come in and out, but we've always been obsessed with physical feats of performance. We've always been obsessed with the look of a well-built person, but yet we've always been slightly turned off by the approach. And, being the 1570s, we're talking about the Renaissance. And I thought it was really interesting that, okay, one of the main things people argue about with bodybuilders is, 2-3 hours a day in the gym is just, it's insane. It's a waste of time. That's a meathead approach. And I thought you would never do that with an artist. You'd never be like, Rembrandt was a phenomenal painter, but dude spent like 8 hours a day painting. He should have cut that down to 20 minutes every other day, right? Like any other art form, you're allowed to go all in. But for some reason, when that art form is building a body for aesthetic reasons, whatever it is that specific artist did, people wanted to cut it down. They liked the result, even when they didn't admit they liked the result. But they did not like the process. And they always had issues with, well, that's too much protein or that's too much exercise. But now they're dumb. But look at the fact they can't move properly, right? And they take your extreme case of the current champion bodybuilder, Mr. Olympia, whatever, and be like, see, the guy or girl can barely move, or I'd never want to look like that, right? But you kind of do. And it's just interesting that all throughout history, we constantly say, we need to be Hippocrates. Eating alone will not keep a man well. He must also take exercise. That was 400 BC, right? So we've always known the importance of exercise, and we know that there is an aesthetically beautiful body, but we hate something about that process turns us off, and we just think you should be able to get there by doing less or not doing what they did. And it's funny because I think that's what drives us constantly away from what really the 1970s, your Arnold Schwarzenegger, your Serge Nubret, your Frank Zane, what they kind of had figured out. And those were aesthetically pleasing bodies by most counts. Same with the Bev Francis and well, not necessarily Bev per se, but the women of that era as well, right?
And Rachel McLish and like
there we go,
very first, right?
Yeah.
No
offense to Bev. Yeah.
But you're right. But built muscle and was still very feminine. But like I would imagine she might be, if anyone hasn't look her up, Rachel McLish. She's kind of the first Miss Olympia who still maintained quite a feminine look, but wasn't overbearing to the point where I'd imagine women would shy away from it. They might not want to go all the way to where she went to, but I'd imagine most women who were like, oh yeah, give me most of that. Like if I could get even part way to where she finished, why wouldn't they go? Like that's not an overwhelming look, right?
And you think about like from an art point of view, right? You take art lessons and you turn painting into a hobby, not because you want to be the next Gustav Klimt. You just want to be good, right? So if the Mr. Olympias and the Schwarzeneggers and McLishes are the sort of the pinnacle, right? But maybe you don't get quite there. But it's interesting that it really is stealing from the fact that up into the 70s, this was an art form. Like it really was viewed as something that you built and then put on display. And then all of a sudden, it was this argument over look versus athletics. And you kind of suggest that all these pumped up bodybuilders are weak as kittens and can't move. That was one of the things that was kind of thrown out there. They're dumb as bricks. I mean, we're just slandering them now. And this should be taken over by science, and we can scientifically design a better way to get somewhere that we've already been. And that's where it gets very confusing, right? We already know what we're doing, but we want to scientifically prove a better way to do it. And that better way keeps coming right back to the way they did it.
Right. And so I get to capture it one word, they just call these people meatheads, which is you just cut them down as much as you can all in one word. And yeah. I think this all still comes back to the gene. We talked about this in a podcast about hiding your genes with Ozempic. The idea that you're a fraud if you work out and change the shape of your body such that people are like, is that really who you are? Or did you like intervene into your life in a way that fundamentally changed the shape of your body? So now you present yourself as more powerful, more athletic, more something than if you otherwise were. And to Brad's point, the art of it is just thrown out the window in this case because, well, it's not maybe styling your hair the way your clothes, can be artistic and you can lean right into that. But the minute you just the actual size and shape of your body or even its performance, it's like all of that is, again, this whole, that's not who you really are. You've intervened into what otherwise you just would have been if you just didn't do anything. So, yeah. So we revere the person who's just genetically like that. But the minute you try to manipulate your way to displaying maybe more vigorous fit genes, well, then I'm skeptical. Something not to trust about a person who A, wants to do that, and B, goes ahead and does it.
And it's funny because we do the opposite the other way. If I told you that Mozart was just never practiced and was a naturally gifted musician from birth, it kind of takes away from the fact that he practiced every day for hours and hours. It's funny that for some reason, the body is a sculpture. The hours you put into it was a detriment. But if I was a sculptor working with marble, and I'm like, oh, I've honed my craft over 50 years of 8 hours a day, you'd be like, wow, that's impressive, right? So there is something to say about it being on the human body that dramatically changes our perception of the work put in. I thought it was interesting. Okay, so Andrew Huberman, right? We can agree that he's a fairly bright human being who is fairly well built. If you took the last 5 years of podcasting away from Andrew, and I took a picture of him, and I was like, hey, this is my plumber, not knocking plumbers. He does really great work, but he's a little bit dim, so you got to talk slowly to him. You'd almost be like, oh, okay, because he's big. He's got a beard. He's got a thick neck. And at the same time, I'm like, hey, this guy's a neuroscientist. You might not believe me. And it's just, we just have this initial view that anyone who is big and well built is not that bright. The stereotype that's, portrayed in Family Guy and Simpsons and American Dad and all those things as well. And it's just funny that for some reason we want to take away from that person the idea they can be both well built and bright. And we want to take away from them the fact that the work they put into well built was well used time. Mm-hmm. Right? Like it's a very odd fascination we have with tearing it down. And then at the exact same time, wanting it built back up with science.
Right. And just to re-arrive back at where people have already figured it out. I don't know if this is just a lack of our understanding or we haven't looked into it, but does this same thing hold for women? Is there such thing as a meathead woman? I mean, and I don't mean the super extreme, clearly on anabolics, women who do full-on bodybuilding who've crossed into the uncanny valley.
You've never heard a blonde joke? Like if they're beautiful, they're dumb, right?
Well,
not only that, but I've known enough women who are considered beautiful enough, I'm staring at the ceiling, that people assume that they're not nice people. Right. Or
Okay.
that they have problems making friends. So it's similar, but not the same.
Yeah,
but
but okay. In that case, they're being labeled or stereotyped. That could be just genetics. They just happen to be blonde. But what if
Right.
right? So the blonde bimbo stereotype, the unfair designation there. But what I'm saying is that isn't like meaningful effort put into that. Like
not tearing down the work they've done.
Right. So set
Okay.
aside someone
Yeah.
who dyes their hair blonde, I guess. But I mean the direct example of so on the guy's side, a guy who goes to the gym on purpose to build muscle, to look more muscular, I guess, and leaner, and get that that sculpture Adonis looking physique, and that's the goal. I just want to build myself into that general shape, and then you're a meathead, you got it, you must be stupid. Like, oh, that's way too much time. It's vanity. It's all just tear him down. You're a meathead. You can't possibly be smart. So, is there a female analogy or a comparative where a woman works towards whatever her best aesthetic is? So, in our case, it would be the Venus hourglass shape, but the numbers we more or less worked out. So, it's not overly muscular. It's just however you would say it, like toned and in what we would call an aesthetic shape. Is there the sort of meathead version for a woman who's like, wow, you're putting way too much effort into your body. Like, you must be stupid. Like, I don't know if that exists.
I don't know. They definitely get you're too big, you're too small. Whatever you're doing, it doesn't. I don't like that look. They get that a lot. I don't know if they then get and therefore you have a very low intelligence. I don't know if that happens.
Yeah, and now let me qualify that. I'm sure women get picked on more than men for their appearance in all directions.
Yeah.
A lot by other women. I don't know how much men pick on it, but I know women can be pretty vicious to each other, and I know that there's pressures there that guys don't experience. So, for the women listening, I get it. Like, I'm not saying you guys don't experience like being stereotyped, picked on, judged. I get that it's brutal how many different ways you guys get judged that we.
But you mean the exact correlation between muscle and intelligence?
Yes, and I know it's ways that we don't get judged, but so in the guy's case, it's kind of just this one, like, oh, you're a meathead, you're stupid. So I just wonder if there's a specific, you went out of your way to change the shape of your body into what we would say is you're aiming for an aesthetic, and you get picked on for that, and somehow it translates into your intelligence. Like, can the stereotype of a girl be you've exercised your way, now you're a bimbo from exercise?
Yeah,
the way a meathead guy is essentially just a bimbo, but. Maybe it's there. Leave in the comments if maybe I'm unaware of it. I've never been told, or I've never heard that particular being picked on for exercise for women. Amongst all the ways women can be stereotyped and judged, that's not one that I'm fully aware
like in Bill's book on sweat, there's very little mention of women. Right. What else do we have? In most of the historical books on weight training, bodybuilding, it's generally geared around men. I know there was a Pumping Iron movie based around the women of bodybuilding. Admittedly, I haven't watched it, but it exists. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. It'd be interesting to hear people's takes on it. So not necessarily just being stereotyped based on the work you put in to changing the way your body looks, but specifically your intelligence being judged based on how you've changed your body.
Inversely proportional. The more sort of buff you get, the dumber you must be. Maybe that, but you know what? Maybe that's it. Maybe that line just holds for guys and girls.
Could be, yeah. But back to the 70s bodybuilders. So my thing specifically with that era is we'll go nutrition next, but with exercise, it is two things. It is they worked out for 2 hours a day, almost every day. And whether or not that was true, I would say for the majority of them, it was true. There were some outliers where it wasn't. It's funny that we, myself included, in this era are like, yeah, but that's too much, and you should be trying to only get it done in 20 minutes twice a week, right? Like the other extreme, which is funny because what if you really enjoy your time in the gym and you're creating art and you're kind of lost in that process, why cut it down? And if you're like, well, because you would get better results, I'm like, better than Arnold Schwarzenegger and Serge Nubret and Olivia, like you really can't get better. And then the argument is like, yeah, but they're all on drugs. I'm like, well, so is everybody now, right? Including your amateurs and your recreational gym rats. So that can't be it. So you have this group of people who enjoyed working on their craft for hours per day and got fantastic results that could be displayed on a stage for everybody to see. And the immediate reaction is try to be like, yeah, but they did it too much. And I find that fascinating.
Well, focusing on the guys who actually did it as a career, sure, they can spend more time. A lot of them did 2-a-days as well, especially towards a contest. And guys and girls alike, and all the way up to modern day, have adopted this concept of like shockingly, you do more work to try to burn more fat towards the show. Who would have ever thought that would work? And to get to the point where you do 2-a-day. So one is, many people do one workout of weights and then they go back for cardio because they just don't want to mix the effort and the mental intensity for each one into the same workout. And and that works. And there's no reason to tell people not to do it. As long as you don't break down, just knock yourself out. Have as much, spend however much time you want in the gym.
Then the other one I thought was interesting is kind of a two-parter, is the suggestion that somehow these men and women were weak, like compared to other sports. And I think the general comparative is powerlifters. And then it's funny because they're weak compared to powerlifters, but with extreme specificity, because powerlifters are great at bench, squat, dead. And bodybuilders are still very good at those exercises, just not quite as good because they don't specialize in them.
Yeah,
so I thought that was...
Right. And then they get criticized for not being as athletic and as agile as like
that was my next one, the athleticism, but
like football or soccer. It's like, well, that's not what they're trying to do.
No, but not only that, I don't.
Who cares?
Yes,
Who
there's
cares if they're not
examples.
that agile.
Yeah, and then some of them are. That's the other thing, right? Is that if they partake, weird word, if they partake in athletics and bodybuilding, they will probably be able to move well. If they only do bodybuilding and have never had any interest in athletics, then they probably move like someone who doesn't do athletics, your average person. But to suggest that somehow the bodybuilding, outside of the extremes of just being truly muscle bound, generally the men and women who were bodybuilding in the 70s could probably move and play tennis and do the things that you or I can do, maybe even better than us, right? And they don't move like professional athletes because that's not their sport.
Well, especially once they've
argument.
Right, especially once they've built up to a larger size. But and also just to criticize the time spent in the gym, like 2 hours, like so 24 hours in a day, and you're saying 2 hours of exercise is not too much. That's just a sign of the times of how pathetic it's gotten with what we imagine is a standard or acceptable amount of activity on a daily basis nowadays.
But and I was going to go on that point because in sports, that's fine. So Rose, a AA hockey player at 14, who's there on the ice like 8-9 hours a week. And no one's like, yeah, but they should only be on the ice for 20 minutes twice a week and they get just as good results. Like no one would be like, you'd get the same, if not better results for your aspiring young football player looking for a scholarship. He just needs to cut down to only taking reps throwing like twice a week for 20 minutes, right? Your aspiring D1 shot putter, some kid in high school, and like what you really need to do is drastically cut down on how much you actually do. We don't think that way for sports, but we want to think that way for bodybuilding and fat loss. And I don't know why, but it's the almost constant go-to for any marketing of any workout program. And I'm guilty of this, right? Is like, yeah, but you get twice as much done in half the time. But in any other sport or any other hobby, right? Like it's painting, sculpture, pottery, quilting, right? You don't be like, yeah, but what you really want to do is cut down the amount of time you're doing something you love, like quilting, to just 20 minutes once a week, and you'll be a better quilter. Like
I think it's this efficiency economy and this getting bang for your buck and leaning into you can buy your way into the more efficient, spend less time on this so you have more time for something else. And with exercise, again, the national average, and I've been doing research, we're going to cover another podcast on how little people actually exercise and how few people in any modern industrialized country even get close to the recommended minimum amount of exercise. I mean, just getting to the minimum, like maybe some of the data I'm looking at, maybe 20% of the population gets to just the minimum recommended
amount of movement, not even exercise, right?
To try to, and this is like the minimum amount to try to minimize lifestyle disorders like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cerebral vascular, like all of it, right? That's just to hit the minimum, maybe 20% based on the data you're looking at, get there. I'm not even talking about changing your body so it actually looks any better or it fundamentally changes like at all. I'm just talking about hitting some. So we are so woefully behind on what normal amount of human activity could and should be, or let's say it this way, that your body's capable of. We're so far off of it that we're going to criticize a couple of hours a day, like maybe even an hour a day. That is pathetic that we actually think we can say something above an hour is too much. But
is that the reason? Is it the fact that watching people change their bodies doing 2 hours of work, your argument against is, but that's too, I don't like that trade-off. And since I haven't gotten those results, I'm going to say they're doing too much. Like, you know what I mean? It's almost, you're attacking it because like we said, if the 1970s bodybuilders have shown us the way, but the way looks kind of hard, and maybe we'll just attack it instead of actually embracing it.
Yeah, you're going to attack it because you couldn't be bothered to do it. And if anyone tells me they don't have 2 hours, they're just lazy. They just don't want to put the time in. And you don't have to do any of this, but if you're interested at all in changing the look and shape of your body, but then you're like, but I can only dedicate 45 minutes every third day to it. Well, then you actually aren't going to get anywhere. And that, you can get as far as those 45 minutes every couple of days will get you.
Great. Yeah. You can do a lot. It just maybe not as much as you could have, right?
There's a cause and effect here. Like if you dedicate more time to this, you're going to get further. If you dedicate less time to this, you're not going to get as far. That's just it. That's just physiology. And I'm sure anyone who says, I just don't have the time, and then if they chart out the amount of time they spent on social media or watching TV, you'd be like, well, I can find 10 hours right there if you cut those in half. But, and now maybe that's necessary downtime. I don't know what the specifics are of everyone's life, but I would guess the majority of people have a few extra hours than they are putting into exercise that they really could put into exercise.
And specific to bodybuilding, the other thing is you don't need to do 2 hours. So just keep using 2 hours. It's nice and simple. You don't need to do 2 hours a day every day for the rest of your life. You can fundamentally change the way your body looks in 3 to 4 months, 6 months doing that. Like you can make a lot of progress and maybe you can cut back. We were talking earlier off air about Mike Mentzer and how Mike Mentzer is a bodybuilder who was a very large advocate of HIIT training. So very intense but infrequent workouts. We're talking once every 7 days. But the interesting thing about Mike is at 19, he was massive. He looked like a pro bodybuilder at 19. So he had built up the mass necessary to then he could stimulate that with this high frequency training. So he built up probably on 2 hours a day, like every other bodybuilder of that time, then realized I can maintain and hone and tweak this with a lot less work, but done intensely.
Yeah.
Right?
And you gotta be careful when you follow high intensity. Oh, I just do one working set. For the guys who advocate for that, and if any women are doing the same thing where they just do like one really hard set and that's the working set, they spend a long time with what otherwise other people would find a lot of weight to warm up into the working set. So I mean, some of these guys, the really big and strong ones, they're lifting 100 pounds and then 200 pounds and 300 pounds. They're like, well, my working set's the 400-pound set. Like most people can't even get through your warm up. Like
Yeah.
that would be monumental effort for them to even get you through your warm up. But for them, they're like, those ones don't count. But they spent an hour warming up with massive effort, which then they get to the set they call the working hit set. So with Mike Mentzer, like that's, and the people downstream of his philosophy.
Dorian Yates' Blood and Guts video, when half the video is him warming up with insane weight.
Yeah. Dorian Yates is 100. He's bench pressing all the way up to close to 500 pounds, but he only calls the 500 pound set the working set.
Yeah.
But he pyramided for an hour to get to it. So I've noticed that people take that like the wrong way, and they're like, oh, I can literally do this in 20 minutes. Like, not a chance. Those guys were in there for like an hour and a half.
And they take multiple days off. They do, but most of them aren't beginners. They've built up the strength to move 500 pounds. They've built up the mass required to build up 500 pounds. They built up the expertise in that movement to move 500 pounds, so that their all-out effort does take a couple of days to recover from, but it's enough stimulus to maintain that body weight, right? Like so it's a very weird trick and play. And then the question, of course, is, since there were guys in the 70s doing 2 hours a day, and there were guys in the 70s doing less, they were sort of in the range, but they were all sort of working out. Why do we incessantly need to try to reinvent the wheel and science our way through this? And I just keep getting back to that sort of Renaissance idea of, you would never take a Rembrandt painting and be like, yeah, but we could break this down scientifically and give you exact ratios, exact colors you need to make it good. It ruins it. But that's what we're doing with exercise, right? Is we want to take the artistry out of it, and the idea that maybe you use brushstrokes differently than I do, and I use my lateral raise differently than you do. There is an art to trying to figure out what you started with, and what your lump of clay kind of looked like, and how you're going to mold that. There is an art to that we seem to just want to assume everyone starts with the same lump of clay, with the same shape, the same amount of clay. The clay is of the same consistency, so it should just function the same way for everyone, so we can just algorithm our way into a better workout.
Yeah, it's this trying to cross it from calling it art, like the reshaping of your body is your way of resculpting yourself, and to actually view it as a bit of an art project, which is that's what I would maintain. Anyone who's actually moving along, that's kind of how it really is. But no, it must be for health. It must be for longevity. It must be for function. Like all of this nonsense. Like, oh, well, it's functional. It's like, what do you mean functional? Nobody, 99.9999% of people that work out aren't pro athletes. They don't.
And that was it's that goal hijacking from athletics that I find very interesting, right? People want. I was in a conversation with someone the other day about rate of force development, and I was like, "What are you, 19-year-old aspiring athlete? Or are you a 53-year-old trying to get healthier and more fit? Like why?" And I get the draw towards it. We all want to be superheroes, and we all want to be athletes, but end of day, you really have to kind of do a risk to benefit and a risk to reward ratio on these things. Like, why are you chasing how quickly you can force development your way into a workout when that's not something you're going to use ever in your life?
You know what? And this comes back. I bring this back. My very first exposure to working out was bodybuilding for this express purpose of getting on stage. I trained with guys who like right in the middle of my first years of working out, with multiple training partners who were routinely going to shows, and we would go to shows, help them pose, make sure they looked right and all that. But there's something like freeing, and there's a community around the idea that that's just fully admitting that's why we're in the gym. That's all we're doing here. And it's not this health thing or measuring your VO2 max and all this other whatever, like that no one cares about. It's like everyone
in that community. Yeah.
No one would work out if it made them look worse, but objectively healthier. Like, how about this?
Good call. Yeah,
how about this?
Okay.
If we came up with the scientifically proven way to work out, and it proved longevity, it proved, like, there was no doubt, We would all live longer. We would not get heart disease and all of that stuff. And we'd all make it to 100 plus. But necessarily, you put on 50 or 60 pounds of fat, around your waist. And I don't know, maybe even decrease the pallor of your skin. You kind of looked pale. But you were healthy as hell. But that's
chubby
just
vampires.
Chubby vampires. That's what you turn into. But but you're going to be healthy. Like, who would even do that? People are like, nope. Like, no,
especially
no
since it wouldn't be making to 100, right? With what we know currently about longevity, we'd be like, we could add another 2 to 3 years onto your life, but this is what you have to do. That makes the trade-off even weirder, right? Like,
right.
hotter.
Well, whatever.
Weirder.
Just take away the aesthetic. Oh, you're going to get healthier, but not only are you not going to change in a direction where you like the way it looks, you're actually, based on our measurements and our assumptions, and if everyone's just telling the truth to themselves, you're just going to get into a shape you like less. But you're healthier. No, like, literally no one's doing that. Like, just, it's not going to happen. The only reason again, this comes back to some of the research I'm doing, which is really poorly done, by the way, but to try to figure out why people even work out. Like,
the research you're reviewing is poorly done, not the research you're doing is poorly done.
No, the research the research I'm reviewing is I mean, it's barely worth the paper it's written on when you look at how they're doing this. As if we need research as to why people work out. Like, as if I wonder why people work out. And one of the things is like, goals and feedback that happens like immediately is more impactful than goals for like 10 years from now. Really? So you needed to research that. So people respond and might go to the gym or take up exercise more realistically if it actually feels good in the moment in the gym. Like, that the gym itself might feel good, some parts of it, regardless if there's a little bit of uncomfortableness, or immediately after the workout you feel better, and then subsequent to that you might look better in the short term. Right. All of this research was to figure out, people go to the gym because it makes them feel better and they might look better, but telling them they're going to be healthier 50 years from now, not so much. Like, you had to research that. Like, we already know that.
I think in the argument over strength training or intensity versus volume, that's one of the reasons strength training tends to win out with people, is because it's closer to immediate feedback. Getting stronger in the gym and lifting a bit more weight is an awesome feedback, whereas looking better takes longer. And so the volume, and you'd always go towards, it's easy to trend, especially as a beginner, towards I just want to get stronger, because it's the immediate feel good feedback. Like, it's very concrete. There's more weight on that bar that I just moved for a range of motion. Like, I did that. So I think that's why people gravitate towards that as beginners. And then I think as advanced lifters, people tend to gravitate more towards doing more work because it's very difficult to get stronger. So that feedback disappears.
Yeah. So strength, without even changing the shape or look of your body, strength, especially for beginners, strength comes so quickly in specific exercises. Yeah, it's a skill. So there's feedback right there. There's immediate feedback. Hell, you get better from one set to the other in a given workout.
Yes.
As you just get more balanced, a little bit more coordinated. You're like, oh man, I'm getting really good at that exercise. So there's direct feedback that makes, I'm going to do a bit more of that. Then muscles start changing, even without going through the pain of trying to lose some fat. Muscles in general will change the general shape of your body. So then you start getting that feedback. Then if you even take a shot at some kind of fat loss diet, and if you actually have any consistency, fat comes off like faster than you think. Then that again starts changing the look and shape of your body. So that's all short-term feedback. Without any of that, I doubt anyone would put up with going to the gym long term. It's all of these short-term wins and feedback that keeps us going. And ironically, those wins keep us going long term, which then translates into the long-term benefit. But without those short-term wins along the way, I don't think anyone's putting up with working out on a regular basis. No,
but to your point, what the 1970s bodybuilders did right was their workouts were based around community, right? There's a group of them it was kind of us at university. A group of us got together and you went to the gym. They chased the pump, right? Which feels good, right? They did get stronger, which feels good. So they did everything to make it long-term and consistent by building a community around it. And they were generally having fun being rebels at the time, right? They were counterculture. They were, and because they were so counterculture, because bodybuilding was so rare, they were giants among average people, right? The men and women who were, the rebellious bodybuilders were much bigger than your average person at the time, right? They were a spectacle, and I think they enjoyed that. But it was a community they based around it. It was the fact that it was built around the biofeedback of making the gym enjoyable, like chasing that pump and getting stronger and not necessarily injuring yourself chasing weights that were too heavy for you, right? Because you were trying to stimulate a muscle. I think they did all of that really, really well. And that's what we've maybe lost a little bit now, because it's not a counterculture movement. Everyone, not everyone's at the gym, but the gym has a bit of a different feel to it. But it wasn't just the training that made the 1970s bodybuilders different, or sort of to you, what we're kind of suggesting is almost pinnacle. It was their approach to nutrition as well, right? They weren't at the level of sciencing their food down to individual components and macronutrients and micro minerals and that kind of thing. They were generally using food through trial and error as a way to look the way they wanted to look.
Right. Yeah. So I made some notes on that too. And in light of some of the recent research, like the 100 grams of protein after a workout actually stimulates muscle growth, like as if that research needed to be done. But again, re-arriving through, I don't know, just so much effort in scientific circles at stuff that was proven to work just by trial and error from people who weren't scientists, but they applied it. So like the basic concept of eat more protein, like as if we still need to research that. Like that's 70s era bodybuilders, and then downstream all of us since then just understood maybe more protein might do something. And now in 2024, a study has to come out saying, oh, by the way, 100 grams of protein might actually do something. It's like, well, yeah, they figured that out, whatever, 50, 60 years ago. I even have a note here saying the meat and water diet, which is essentially fasting,
right?
Fasting, protein, which is exactly the study they just did. Like as if we
Serge
needed to
Nubret
do that.
was doing intermittent fasting before we ever researched intermittent fasting.
And
right?
then he was and then it was just
Love
lots
Serge.
of protein, fasting.
Yeah.
Now,
and then what do they do outside of that? Lots of fruits and veggies to stay healthy, right? Like it's pretty standard stuff. Like they weren't chasing their folic acid requirements through vegetables. They were just eating more vegetables.
They didn't have supplements like we did. Protein powders were terrible, so it was they just got all their protein through normal foods, and they like took up a vitamin here and there, but nothing like really significant. Like I have here lower carbs before contest. Oh, really? So less carbs actually helps burn some fat? Who would have thought
more
that?
carbs if you're feeling flat, right? Like they could tell by the way they felt. This is what I thought was really cool with their intuitive eating. They could tell by the way they felt during their workouts what parts of their nutrition need to be changed. That's amazing. And that's a great way to intuitively eat. And it's still related back to food, not nutrients. Right? I needed more carbohydrates, but there was like more pasta, more potatoes, right? Like they were always altering what they ate based on how they felt during a workout rather than what they were reading they were supposed to be eating.
Right. Oh yeah, totally. This is a great example of application. They don't get caught up in analysis paralysis and reading this and reading that. They just went and did it. They just did stuff. They didn't wait around for a paper to come out and then have an argument online for a month and then decide if it was a good idea or not. They just did stuff. So like I have a note here, just whole foods. Their diets were mostly whole foods. Well, okay, it's pretty straightforward, right? Just eat whole foods. Like, I mean, why is that? There's nothing revolutionary about that.
No. And that would go, I'm sure if I go through Bill's book and go back to Hippocrates, that was the same argument. There's probably arguments for whole foods over whatever they would consider processed foods in the 1700s, 1500s, 1200s. It just keeps going back, right? And so it is simple. The other thing I thought was probably most fascinating about 70s bodybuilding, as opposed to the way we approach it now, And again, I mean, there is a generation online who are back to this, but if it's truly an art and if it's your art, then it's okay to be a lifestyle. But we made this argument like it doesn't have to be your lifestyle, right? You can get in and out of the gym and it doesn't have to be all encompassing. And now I'm like, but if it's what you love, it's okay to be your lifestyle. It's absolutely fine to say this is what I do. And I mean, we've made this argument for people who are sort of that 50 and above crowd. It's absolutely fine for your interest in your body to be your lifestyle. Sure. And the idea that it shouldn't be because that makes you vain or whatever, be a rebel, right? Just go for it, do it. So it was the interesting part of it. It was their lifestyle. They did go to Venice Beach and hang out for 3 or 4 hours and work out in public at a beach to make a spectacle of themselves. And they enjoyed it, right? So there's no reason to not make it your lifestyle if it's something you truly love doing.
Yeah, there's no reason not to lean into it if that's what you want to do. Again, this all comes back to just forgetting about what other people think. Like, it's just none of their business. And if you are fascinated with changing the shape of your body, just go for it.
Yeah, and the sciencing of nutrition, right? The problem about that, and I think this is a podcast we're going to do soon, is it's the science is sort of population based, and then there's the individuals. So if science says diet X is the very best diet for bodybuilding, but diet X makes me feel kind of bad and gassy, then maybe diet X isn't for me, right? Or if it's not working for me, right? So whereas the art of bodybuilding would be this diet works for me, I like the way my body's looking, and I feel good. But science doesn't N of one ever, or N of one. Science is never based on a single individual. It's always large groups to tease out data, which is great, but eventually your application to you has to be based on your experience and your feelings of how it's affecting you.
The further diet gets from art and the closer it gets to science, the more miserable you're going to be.
True. Yeah, I mean, because you're going to get down to some gooey paste that you eat. Right?
I mean, chefs literally make a living out of making art out of food.
That's a great point.
Right?
Yes.
And then like if you want to get super fancy with like they call it the culinary arts, for God's sakes. Like it's an art. Yeah. And then on the other extreme, you break it down to its macronutrients, then you break it down to the components of that, and then are my essential fats, like how many carbon chains, and then where's the double bond? Like you get out of here. Like I listened to a podcast recently, and I can never get this time back. They spent I don't know how much time dissecting down the different forms of magnesium supplements. Yeah. And get out of here. Like if make sure, if you've measured it, then they started arguing, well, blood measurements of magnesium don't even tell you how much is in the cellular compartment. It's like, all right, so there's no answer here. First of all, there's 20 forms of magnesium. Can't measure it anyways, so you have no idea if you're low in it. So why are we even talking about this? So
on the flip side, brother's son, the artistry they use in using food throughout that series, how much did you want a churro after brother's son?
Constantly. I've been
searching for churros.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like I want to have that experience where I'm hypnotized by a churro the way he is.
When Charlie first takes a bite of the churro from Bruce, stares at it, the way they did that footage, and then he just grabs the entire packet of churros and walks off. Yeah. It was like something about just the artistry of that, and realizing, and then they constantly reference throughout that TV series on Netflix, by the way, brother's son, how great this one churro guy is. Like it's a common theme throughout the series, and it just made you desire a churro, not because they were breaking down the health benefits of churro, but because of the artistic way they represented the churro in that TV series.
Well, and this is the fun of food in this TV.
Exactly.
And okay, so this is I know it's just a fictional TV series, but I think it's instructive that we've done such a bad job of deconstructing food down to its component parts and taking all the fun out of it. I mean, in this series, you've got what is supposed to be the world's most deadliest assassin completely sidetracked with trying to figure out how to make the world's best churro at home. So he's harassing the churro guy at his churro cart, trying to figure out exactly how to, and he just can't quite get it right. Like he's trying to
exact kind of cinnamon and the type of salt.
And then he tries it at home, and he's like, it sucks. And then he goes and literally watches the guy at the cart make the churro, and he's like, and he's like studying it. And so he's fascinated with the art of making the perfect churro, and he's trying to recreate it. I mean, I guess you could say he's somewhat of an artist in his own way, that he's the actual best assassin in the world, and his fighting style is all choreographed and everything. So
based on martial arts, right? Like it's
martial
again, an art
arts. So
form.
you have a I guess you would call him a dark, evil artist, but still appreciating the art of the food. And what we've done with science is just break it down to just take anything enjoyable out of food. And now I'm not saying crush churros and cheesecake all day long. I mean, can if you want. Again, none of this matters if you don't care about changing the look and shape of your body. But if you want to, you do have to pay a little bit of attention to how the things you eat affect the look and shape of your body. But I don't think it ever has to get to the point where it takes the fun out of food and removes the art out of all of this is art. Changing the look and shape of your body is art, but food is also a kind of art.
Yes. And it's an art, and I'm going to even posit it's a sport. And the reason I'm going to suggest that is just because we brought up sort of fighting and made me think of MMA is end of day, you can science the hell out of the science of fighting, but the winner is the winner at the end. You know what I mean? Like it's the art of it is the application in the ring or the octagon or whatever they're in. Same with actual sports. You know, you can stats analyze any sport now down to just unbelievable levels of detail, but whatever team had the most points won. Right. And it was the art and the application and the coaching you could consider an art. So I think bodybuilding is no different in that 1970s period of time where it was an art form based on trying to create an aesthetically looking object you could put on stage and people would vote on which one is best. That was kind of the pinnacle of it because they were very clear, to your point, towards the objective.
Yeah.
Right. And then sometimes they would, I'm sure, take some time off and be like, I'm going to enter a bench press contest or a squat contest, you know, like a powerlifting contest. Or I think they even entered a strongman competition sometime in the early 80s, a group of them. But for the most part, their hobby, their art was creating this body. And we've just moved so far from that, trying to science it. But then in order to science it, because you can't science the aesthetic of a body, you have to take surrogate endpoints of strength or, you know what I mean, other things that didn't matter as much and pretend like it's the part that matters.
Right.
If that makes sense.
And right. And then on the food side of it, it's not like they just, I mean, it just broke all the way down to supplements and like food units of protein and food units of how many units of carbs. Like many of them just were like, I don't know, I just ate a lot of protein and started reducing because they just understood more protein and less carbs helped, but they still tried to eat whole foods and mixed meals that were at least somewhat enjoyable and not just break it all the way down to like amino acids and carbohydrate chains. And like, it just, it gets way too miserable if food just becomes like a fuel source. Maybe in very acute moments, like a couple of weeks here and there, when you're leading into, again, and this is at the most highest, like strictest levels, right before like a competition or a show or something. But in general, it's not unrealistic to have an eye towards how your food and your diet affects the look and shape of your body with that, but still have enjoyable food. Like that was also sorted out. Like it didn't have to be like a miserable existence of always having a scale out and measuring stuff. You could sort of figure it out by eyeballing it and seeing how it changes the shape of your body. So it never had to get so technical. It never had to get so granular. And I think the amount of information people are throwing around now that we have access to, like I said, you could spend an entire day getting caught up on just the form of one kind of supplement out of hundreds of supplements. And which the right kind for me? And do I take it in the morning or at night? Oh, do I take two different forms of the same thing? One form in the morning, one form at night?
Right.
I mean, it would just I could see how that would turn people off to all of this and be like, forget it. I'm just ordering a pizza.
Yeah. But at end of day too, 1970s bodybuilders, they were aware it was the work they were doing in the gym. And then the nutrition complemented that, right? But they knew it was the work, right? It was the paintbrush to canvas that mattered and the colors they chose. And yes, you know, every once in a while they'd stop and consider, I don't know, the make of the paint or something like that. But in general, it was their skill putting paint on a canvas that mattered. And it was, and I think then we want to take that away from them constantly. And we want to science it down to your point. Did they take the right form of magnesium at the right time of day during the right solar eclipse? I don't know, right? Like it's So the artistry of it and the keeping grounded on doing the work and then eating to make sure that you're supporting that work was pretty much everything they did. And then from what I can tell, it was kind of the look in the mirror, and it was, again, as a group. So it was not just you, because you can be so hard on yourself, but it was like you and 6 of your buddies looking in the mirror, and you know, the one girl going like, no, you're still getting leaner, so maybe keep the calories, keep the amount of food you're eating where it is. And then they would just alter what they ate slightly based on the results they were getting. Mm-hmm. That simple, right?
And you brought up a really good point here, and I think we're gonna have to wrap this up soon. But a really good point you brought up is it was the food complemented the workout, and that can't be that can't be stated as strongly. I mean, that was so important that you had to be working out, and you had to be working out with some kind of purpose and some legitimate consistency and intensity. And if you weren't, it didn't matter what you did with your diet. I mean, I know that there's the statement that you can't out-exercise a bad diet or a poor diet, but in reality, your body isn't changing any direction you want it to change without the workout. Like if you're not working out, all you can do is manipulate fat storage up or down by eating more calories than you burn up and less calories than you burn down. But on the way down, if you're not working out, not only are you not changing the look and shape of your muscles, you're also at the mercy of how much muscle and lean tissue you lose on the way down, along with the fat that you lose on the way down, such that your shape, you're probably not going to be all that thrilled with your shape as you get quote unquote skinny fat.
Best case scenario, if you were to not do any exercise and just try to manipulate based on diet, your best case scenario, smaller version of you now. Worst case scenario is actually a loss of, you actually change the look for the worse, right? You do need the weight training component if your goal is to change the way your body looks.
Right. And again, a lot of what we say here, we're just presupposing because you're listening to us. You are in some way interested in manipulating the look of your body towards some other than what it looks like now. You're trying to move it towards some aesthetic that you have in your mind's eye that you think you might like. And the workout is just so fundamental to that. And I maintain that the workout and the diet go hand in hand in a motivation and a flow to your day sort of thing. I remember me and one of my training partners in college, a good friend of ours, we couldn't come up with a reason of why we would eat anything in particular or not eat anything on a day that we didn't work out, because we couldn't rationalize where that meal fit in relation to the workout and the result we were hoping for. So if it was just a cardio day, if it was a weight day, or if it was some kind of mix where we, played basketball and also did some weight training, then all of a sudden, and you got to remember, we're like in a biological science and nutrition undergrad with an exercise specialty. So we know all of this stuff, and it's being hammered into our head how all of this works. But when we're applying, and we were doing this before college, we were already had an exercise habit. And we were already trying to change the shape of our bodies. But we just had this thought one day. We're like, man, you know what? On a day where I don't work out, I actually don't really, it's hard for me to rationalize why any meal is what it is. Better
than any other meal.
Right. And then it's almost like we kind of realize the workout keeps our focus on what a better way to eat would be.
Yeah, they flow with each other. Yeah.
Yeah. But it really framed my day. And it was almost like, I think we came up with this concept, like the workout set the stage to not spoil the day if we didn't eat in a way that was conducive to changing our body in the direction we wanted to go. Right. So it's like, all right, the stage is set. Had a really good workout, and I don't mess it up by eating off track, that kind of thing. But without the workout, it's almost like, well, how do I eat today? Because I don't have the workout to complement like where I want to go today.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would argue that the view of it as an art form, well, many people will consider that vain, is just that's the canvas it was chosen, right? And that viewing it as an art and working with what works, and I know that sounds kind of weird, seems to be the better approach than to constantly work with what you're told should work, but not getting the results you think you should be getting. Right?
That's really good. And so, so I guess it's time to wrap it up. So is that kind of your closing thought here?
That'll be my closing. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And then I'll add to that. So first of all, it's nobody else's business. If you're fascinated with changing the look and shape of your body, go for it. And I would just say to boost Brad's point here, changing the look and shape of your body towards maybe some sort of aesthetic that you like better, and viewing it as you are your own work of art. Rest assured that as you move towards that, it's highly likely it's leading you to better long-term outcomes as far as health goes as well. So they're not mutually exclusive. So you can let that, I don't know, I hate this word, but you can let that pursuit of vanity or that pursuit of changing the shape of your body be what draws you to doing this, and just know that it's also going to lead to long-term health, I would think.
Yeah. And we can touch on vanity later, but even the idea of if I painted a really great picture and posted it online, that's just as vain. I'm showing you my work, right? So it's just for some reason we really hold on to the idea that being proud of this art is a different level of pride than some other form of art. So and end of day, it's a hobby unless you do it for a living, and that hobby is an art form, and you should be allowed to chase it as a lifestyle, spend the time on it you want to spend on it, and get the results that make you happy with the work you've done.
Yep. And Brad, you said, and I'll just finish with you said the right word. You should be proud of it, and don't let anybody else talk you out of it. It's not their business. Yes. It's your body. It's the only one you got. So do with it as you please.
There we go.
All right. So I think that's a good place to leave it. All right. So for Brad Pilon, I'm John Barbin, and we'll see you next time.